Brian Dias, a postdoctoral fellow in Kerry Ressler's lab at Emory University, had reported that mice inherit specific smell memories from their fathers, even when the offspring have never experienced that smell before, and even when they've never met their father. What's more, their children are born with the same specific memory. That was a big surprising claim, causing many genetic experts to do a double take. The behavior results are surprising, solid, and will certainly inspire further studies by many other research groups. The epigenetic data seems cozy by comparison, with some experts saying it's thin but useful, and others finding it full of holes. So, what's the surprising part? Again, if you followed science news over the past decade, then you've probably heard about genetics, a field that's caught fire in the minds of scientists and in the public. And understandably so, epigenetic studies have shown that changes in an organism's external environment, its life experiences, and even its choices, if you want to get hyperbolic, can influence the expression of its otherwise inflexible DNA code. Epigenetics, in other words, is exciting because it offers a resolution to the tedious, perennial debates of nurture versus nature. But some scientists dispute the notion that epigenetic changes have much influence on behavior. Even more controversial is the idea that epigenetic changes can be passed down from one generation to the next, effectively giving parents a way to prime their children for a specific environment. The key question isn't whether this is so-called transgenerational epigenetic inheritance happens. It does, but rather how it happens and how frequently and in what contexts and species. That's what Dias and Ressler wanted to investigate. Trouble is, environmental influences such as stress are notoriously difficult to measure, so the researchers focused on the mouse olfactory system, the oft-studied and well-mapped brain circuits that process smell. We thought it would give us a molecular foothold into how transgenerational inheritance might occur, Dias says. The researchers made mice afraid of a fruity odor called acetophenin by pairing it with a mild shock to the food. In a study published a few years ago, Ressler had shown that this type of fear learning is specific. Mice trained to fear one particular smell show an increased startle to that odor but not others. What's more, this fear learning changes the organization of neurons in the animal's nose, leading to more cells that are sensitive to that particular smell. 10 days after this fear training, Dias allowed the animals to mate, and that's where the crazy begins. The offspring, known as the first generation, show an increased startle to the fruity smell even when they have never encountered the smell before, and thus have no obvious reason to be sensitive to it. And their reaction is specific. They do not startle to another odor called propanol. Craziest of all, their offspring, the second generation, show the same increased sensitivity to acetophenin. The scientists then looked at the first generation and the second generation's animal's brain. When the grandparent generation is trained to fear acetophenin, the first and second generations' noses end up with more M71 neurons which contain a receptor that detects acetophenin. Their brains also have a larger M71 glomeruli, a region of the olfactory bulb that responds to this smell. When Brian came in with the first set of data, we both just couldn't believe it, Ressler recalls. I was like, well, it must be random. Let's do it again. And then it just kept working. We do a lot of behavioral experiments, but being able to see structural change that correlates with behavior is really pretty astounding. Still, those experiments couldn't rule out some kind of social rather than biological transmission. Perhaps fathers exposed to the fear training treated their children differently, or maybe mothers. To control for these possibilities, the researchers performed an in vitro fertilization (IVF) experiment in which they trained male animals to fear acetophenin and then 10 days later harvested the animal's sperm. They sent the sperm to another lab across campus where it was used to artificially inseminate female mice. Then the researchers looked at the brains of the offspring. They had larger M71 glomeruli just as before. The researchers couldn't perform behavioral tests on these animals because of laboratory regulations about animal quarantine. For me, it clicked when we did the IVF, Dice says. When the brain anatomy persisted, that to me emphasized that it's not really a social transmission, it's inherited. Other researchers also seem convinced. It's high time public health researchers took human transgenerational responses seriously, says Marcus Pembrey, Emeritus Professor of Pediatric Genetics at University College London, who has been championing the idea of epigenetic inheritance for over a decade. I suspect we will not understand the rise in psychotic disorders or obesity, diabetes, and metabolic disruptions generally without taking a multi-generational approach, he says. In an interesting historical aside, Bembry also notes that the new study echoes an experiment that Avian Pavlik did 90 years ago, in which he trained mice to associate food with the sound of a bell. Pavlik reported that successive generations took fewer and fewer training sessions before they would search for food on hearing a bell even when food was absent. Bembry says, nevertheless, the idea that experience could be biologically inherited fell out of favor in the 20th century. If alive today, Pavlov would have been delighted by the Dias and Wrestler paper, first as a vindication of his own experiment and results, and second by the amazing experimental tools available to the modern scientists. Neuroscientists, too, are enthusiastic about what these results might mean for understanding the brain. To my knowledge, this is the first example in any animal of epigenetic transmission of a simple memory for a specific pupil stimulus, says Thomas Ryan.